In the middle of a fight, my wife said that plenty of men want me. So I left her for those men to handle. I didn't expect it to go down like this. Not ever. It all started with a stupid argument. One of those petty, everyday things that you barely remember later on, but feel like the world's ending when they're happening. She'd been on me about something insignificant, as usual. Something about me not taking the trash out on time, or maybe not answering her calls quickly enough when she was out with her friends. It wasn't a big deal, except she'd been carrying around a lot of frustration lately, and I was the only one around to take it out on. That's when she said it. Plenty of men would want me. She spat, her eyes narrowing as she stared at me, daring me to react. The words hung there, heavy and sharp, more cutting than anything she'd said before. We'd been through rough patches before, sure, but nothing had made me feel quite like this. It wasn't the first time we'd fought over something small, but for some reason, this felt different. I wasn't ready for the anger that flooded my chest. Maybe it was because, in the middle of the fight, I realized she actually meant it. She wasn't just throwing words to hurt me. There was a truth behind it, a truth I couldn't ignore anymore. A truth that stung. She wasn't the same person I'd married. I don't care about those men, I shot back, trying to keep my voice steady, but it cracked. I wasn't sure if I was angry or just embarrassed by how I was handling it. I was tired, mentally exhausted from trying to hold on to something that felt like it was slipping away, but I didn't know how to stop it. The tension in the room thickened. My heart started pounding in my chest, like it was trying to escape. I could feel my pulse in my throat, in my fingers, in every inch of me. I didn't know how to calm down. I didn't know how to make her understand that I was doing my best, that I was trying to be there for her, but nothing was enough. She didn't back down either. In fact, she looked almost smug, like she had won something I wasn't even aware I was playing for. Oh, I know you don't care, but you should. Maybe you'd actually start doing something right for once if you did, she continued. Her words were cold, but there was an edge of something else behind them, something I couldn't quite place. Resentment? Regret? A touch of victory, like she had finally found the thing to break me. I tried to say something, but my throat felt tight. All of a sudden, I wasn't sure what I was trying to save anymore. The person I thought I was fighting for? Or the idea of her, the one I'd been holding on to for years, the one I thought I knew. She turned away, arms crossed, her face set in an unreadable expression. I could feel the distance between us growing, not just in the space between our bodies, but in the way she had started to look at me. The way her eyes didn't soften when they landed on me, like I was no longer the person she used to care about. I wanted to scream, to shout that I didn't deserve this, that I had been nothing but patient, nothing but present, nothing but here for her, and she didn't even see it. But what good would that do? She was already checked out. I could see it in the way she held herself, the way she wouldn't even make eye contact. It was like she had already made her decision. I felt small, like maybe she was right. Maybe there were plenty of men out there who would want her, who could give her what I couldn't. But I wasn't about to be the one to beg for scraps of affection. So I left. It wasn't dramatic. There were no slammed doors or shouting matches, no tearful goodbyes. I didn't even pack a bag. I grabbed my jacket, pulled it over my shoulders, and walked out the door. Maybe I should have felt something more. Anger, sadness, confusion. But all I felt was a weird, numb sense of clarity. This wasn't working. She wasn't working. And I wasn't working for her anymore either. I didn't know where I was going, just that I couldn't stay there. Not now. Not after what she'd said. It's not like I hadn't thought about leaving before. But this time, it felt different. This time, there was no turning back. I didn't go to a friend's house, didn't call anyone to tell them what had happened. I just drove. The miles passing by felt like the world pulling me away from everything, away from the mess I had somehow found myself in. The quiet of the car was like a shield. The only sounds were the hum of the tires on the road and the beat of my pulse. I ended up in a bar. Alone. It wasn't some fancy place, just a rundown dive that smelled like stale beer and fried food. But I didn't care. I ordered a drink, leaned against the counter, and let the burn of alcohol crawl down my throat, like it was washing everything away. For the first time in months, I felt something. Anything. The bartender gave me a knowing look, but I didn't care. I didn't want anyone to know. I didn't want to explain. Then the door opened, and someone walked in. They caught my eye, just a quick glance, but I saw the way they looked at me. Not like a broken man. Not like someone who had just left his wife. But like, maybe someone they could talk to. Maybe someone they could be around. I didn't know, and I didn't care. I just knew they didn't see me the way she did. And for once, it felt like maybe that was all I needed. But I wasn't ready to make any decisions. Not yet. The night was still young. I just kept drinking, letting the hours pass by, feeling that strange sense of freedom building inside me. And then I heard her name. The voice came from behind me. She said she'd leave you. I turned, expecting to see someone I knew. But the man who spoke wasn't someone I recognized. And yet, his words cut deep. What the hell? I turned slowly, trying to piece together why this stranger's words felt like a punch to the gut. He was sitting a few stools down, nursing his own drink, his eyes casually drifting over to mine as he spoke. She said she'd leave you, he repeated, more matter-of-factly this time, like it was a conversation we were already having. My heart stuttered for a moment. My mind raced to catch up, to process what this guy was implying. Was he talking about my wife? How the hell did he know? Had she told someone? Had she been telling people that? I didn't know what to say. I just stared at him, trying to figure out whether I should get up and leave or ask him to elaborate. Who the hell are you? I finally managed to get out, though the words came out colder than I intended. I wasn't looking for a confrontation, but I couldn't help myself. This guy knew something, and it made my stomach churn. He smirked like he'd been waiting for this moment, but instead of offering an explanation, he just shrugged, as if the answer was obvious. She didn't think you'd leave. Thought you'd just hang around, put up with whatever she threw at you. My mind was spinning. The nerve of him, talking about my life like he had some sort of inside scoop. What did he know? What did she tell him? I gripped the edge of the bar, trying to steady myself, but there was an unsettling feeling crawling up my spine. Why are you telling me this? I asked, my voice a little more controlled now, though the anxiety was creeping in. My hand was still tight around my glass, as if I needed it to keep me grounded. He took a slow sip from his drink, still acting like we were just having a normal conversation, as though he was some kind of confidant or something else. He didn't seem uncomfortable at all. She came in here a few weeks ago, with someone else. I froze, my mind immediately flashing to every moment I'd ever spent doubting her loyalty, every subtle shift in her behavior, every strange excuse. What do you mean, with someone else? I asked, already dreading the answer. The man's eyes flicked to mine, this time sharper, like he knew he had my full attention. I mean, she came in here, with another guy? They were real cozy. She didn't even notice me watching. Guess she thought I was just another regular guy at the bar. I felt sick. I'd never had any concrete evidence of her being unfaithful before, but hearing it from a stranger, someone who seemed so sure, was like a brick slamming into my chest. I wanted to yell at him, to demand details, to make him take it back, but I couldn't find the words. Instead, I found myself leaning forward, my elbows on the bar, as if somehow being closer would make this all feel less real. You're sure? My voice was quieter now, almost pleading. I hated myself for asking, but I couldn't help it. I had to know. The man leaned back, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. Oh yeah. She was laughing, touching his arm, getting pretty close. She didn't even care who saw. I could feel my pulse in my ears, loud and fast. Every inch of my body was on fire, but it wasn't anger that I felt. It was this deep, gnawing ache, like someone had carved out a part of me that I hadn't even known existed. I didn't know what was worse. The idea that she'd been with someone else, or that she hadn't even thought twice about it. I don't think she cares much about you anymore, the man added, casually, like he was just offering some generic advice. He gave me a look that made me feel exposed, like he knew something I didn't want to admit. I didn't know what to say. I could feel myself starting to unravel, piece by piece. All the things she'd said, the things I had ignored or chalked up to stress or whatever else. Was it all leading to this? Was this the moment where everything I thought I understood about my life, my relationship, just crumbled apart? I looked at the man, desperate for some kind of answer, some kind of closure, but he wasn't offering anything more. He finished his drink and then turned away, signaling for another. As if this wasn't even a big deal for him. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. I left. I barely even registered the walk to my car, the cold air cutting through me, or the hum of the engine starting up. It felt like everything had shifted in an instant, like the world was no longer a place where I could just float along pretending things were fine. As I drove through the night, my mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and possibilities. I didn't even know where I was going anymore. I wasn't sure if I was running away from her or just trying to outrun the feeling of betrayal that had settled into my bones. Eventually, I pulled into a parking lot, one I didn't recognize. The quiet of the night wrapped around me, the only sound being the soft hum of the car's engine. I stared out the windshield, trying to make sense of what had just happened. But there was something else gnawing at me now. Something I hadn't considered in the heat of the moment. What if I wasn't the only one who'd left? What if she was waiting for me to go so she could finally make her own choice? I wasn't sure I wanted to find out, but I knew I had to. I spent the next few days in a haze, mostly driving around, trying to clear my head, but the thoughts wouldn't stop. Every street felt like a reminder of her, of everything we'd built, and everything that was crumbling apart. My phone buzzed a few times, but I didn't have the energy to answer. I didn't want to hear from her. Not yet. Not while everything felt so raw. But then came the message. A simple text. And yet, it felt like a bomb exploding in my lap. We need to talk. I stared at the words on the screen, my hands shaking slightly as I read them over and over. I didn't know what she was going to say, but I could already feel the storm building up inside me again. I didn't want to talk. Not yet. Not when everything was still so unclear. But I couldn't ignore it. I had to know where we stood. I responded, keeping it simple. I'll be there. When I arrived at the house, everything was too quiet. The front door was slightly ajar, and the silence inside almost felt like an omen. It was too empty, too still. She was sitting at the kitchen table, her hands folded together, looking smaller than I remembered. When she saw me, her eyes were a mixture of something. Guilt, maybe, or fear. I couldn't tell. But there was something else there too, something I couldn't quite name. It wasn't the way she'd looked at me before, not the way I'd grown used to seeing her. There was no warmth in her gaze, no connection. I didn't know where else to start, she said, breaking the silence, her voice quiet but steady. I owe you an explanation. I swallowed, the lump in my throat thick. You owe me more than that. The words came out sharper than I meant, but I didn't care. I needed answers. I needed something to make sense of this mess. She didn't react to the sharpness of my tone. Instead, she sighed, her gaze dropping to her hands. I never meant for things to get this bad. But things weren't right, were they? I didn't know how to fix it, and maybe I wasn't even trying anymore. I just stared at her, my mind reeling. She wasn't even trying? That's what it came down to. All those little signs I'd ignored, all those moments where I should have asked questions. I'd been too busy pretending that things could be fixed, that we could go back to how things used to be. She took a deep breath, and for a moment, I thought she might cry. But she didn't. Instead, she continued, I didn't want to hurt you. I thought if I pushed you far enough, you'd be the one to walk away. It would have been easier that way, right? But you didn't. You stuck around, and I kept pushing. And then, when I met someone else, I don't know. It felt like I was already done before it even started. My head was spinning. Someone else. The words hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't just the argument or her snide comments. It wasn't just the way she seemed distant, cold. She had actually been with someone. What the hell are you talking about? I finally managed to choke out. My fists were clenched, but I was barely aware of it. You think you could just go out and do whatever you want, and I wouldn't notice? I didn't think I was living in a fantasy, but maybe I was. Maybe you were. She looked up at me then, her eyes filled with something, regret. I never wanted to hurt you, but I wasn't happy. I couldn't tell you that. I didn't know how. The silence stretched between us, a gulf that felt impossible to cross. All the years, all the moments we'd shared, and here we were, sitting in this kitchen, strangers. I stood up suddenly, my chair scraping harshly against the floor. So what now? You're just going to expect me to walk back into this like nothing happened? I shook my head, the frustration finally spilling over. You think I'd just forget? That I'd let you shut me out like that, and then come back with an I'm sorry? Her face crumpled, but she didn't answer. Instead, she looked away, like she couldn't bear the weight of my words. I took a step back, running my hand through my hair, trying to think, trying to breathe. You were right about one thing, I said, my voice shaking now, though I tried to steady it. I did leave. You wanted me to go, and I did. But not for the reasons you think. She blinked, a frown creasing her forehead. What do you mean? I felt a wave of bitter laughter rise in my chest, but I didn't let it out. Not yet. I left because I finally saw it. I saw that you don't see me anymore. I'm just someone you're stuck with, someone who'll always be here no matter how much you push. You made me feel small, and then you decided it wasn't enough. So you found someone else. Her voice was barely a whisper now. It wasn't like that. It was a mistake. A mistake. I scoffed, the pain in my chest making it hard to breathe. You don't just make a mistake like that. You make choices. You make decisions. And you chose him. The silence that followed was suffocating. Neither of us knew what to say next, because the truth was out. It was in the air, thick and undeniable. She had betrayed me, and I had to decide whether I could live with that, whether I could even try to rebuild what we had, or if it was just too far gone. I turned toward the door. My body was exhausted, my heart was broken, but something inside me was standing taller than it had in months. I can't do this anymore, I said, barely above a whisper. I'm done. Without another word, I walked out the door. I didn't look back. And as I drove away, the weight on my chest began to lift, little by little. The road ahead wasn't clear. It wasn't easy. But for the first time in a long while, I was making my own choice. And maybe, just maybe, that was the only thing I needed to do.